Florence, a city renowned for its beauty, artistry, and opulence, concealed a darker side beneath its gilded surface. In the midst of this elegance lived a widow whose life seemed outwardly ordinary but was secretly shaped by resentment, cunning, and long-brewing vengeance. She was a woman who had navigated the intricate social hierarchy with grace, her presence commanding both respect and subtle envy. Behind her refined manners and carefully curated attire, however, lay a mind sharp as a blade, a mind capable of orchestrating events with frightening precision. Those who encountered her socially often underestimated her, assuming that a widow, though respected, lacked the influence or daring to disrupt the rigid aristocratic order. They could not have been more wrong. Her days were spent in polite company, attending salons, church services, and dinners where conversation was carefully weighed and gestures meticulously observed. But beneath the surface of everyday interactions, she cultivated an acute awareness of human behavior. She noted the fleeting expressions, the involuntary tics, and the subtle manipulations of her peers. Every slight against her, whether a dismissive glance, a whispered rumor, or a condescending comment, was recorded in her memory, a small stone in the foundation of a much larger plan. She understood the fragility of pride, the volatility of jealousy, and the unspoken power dynamics that governed her world. These insights would later serve as the blueprint for her actions, enabling her to manipulate events and people with terrifying precision. In Florence, appearances were everything. The aristocracy valued elegance, etiquette, and lineage above all else. Yet the widow understood that the very masks of civility they wore could be turned to her advantage. She recognized that fear could be wielded as effectively as wealth, and that careful observation could reveal weaknesses invisible to others. Her own grief and isolation, initially a source of societal pity, became instruments in her arsenal. People often underestimated her, believing her reserved demeanor to signify passivity, when in truth it concealed a calculating intelligence that had been sharpened by years of social observation and personal grievance. She had learned that patience was as powerful as any blade, and that time could be her ally in constructing the perfect moment for retribution. Relationships with the city's aristocrats were never simple for her. She had been slighted, ignored, or dismissed by those who considered themselves superior. Men who had once mocked her opinions or dismissed her presence. Women who had whispered cruel judgments or undermined her subtly. All contributed to the quiet accumulation of resentment. She observed alliances and rivalries with a careful eye, noting those whose ambition made them susceptible to manipulation, and those whose arrogance blinded them to danger. The social dances of Florence, the intricate interplay of charm, influence, and subtle intimidation, were the backdrop against which she rehearsed her strategy, each encounter a study in human behavior and a rehearsal for the drama she would one day unleash. The widow's intelligence was complemented by an understanding of human emotion. She knew that fear, surprise, and doubt could be more potent than physical force. She cultivated a presence that was at once alluring and disarming, drawing attention without arousing suspicion. Every glance, every gesture, every smile was a tool, a subtle way of shaping perception and controlling the environment around her. She moved through society as if part of its fabric, yet apart from it, observing, calculating, and planning. Her grief, her patience, and her social acumen coalesced into a mind capable of extraordinary foresight, a mind that could transform social slights into the seeds of a meticulously executed plan. Even in her solitude, the widow's mind remained active, replaying interactions and rehearsing scenarios. She imagined outcomes, anticipated reactions, and refined the intricate steps required to achieve her goals. The masquerade, an event celebrated for its elegance and pageantry, became in her imagination a stage for her carefully conceived design. Every mask, every dance, every flicker of candlelight was considered in her planning. What others perceived as frivolity and festivity, she saw as opportunity. The contrast between the city's outward beauty and the undercurrent of human ambition and envy became a canvas upon which she would paint her dark masterpiece. Using precision, intellect, and the psychological insight she had so painstakingly cultivated. In essence, The widow of Florence embodied the duality of elegance and menace. Outwardly refined, socially respected, and seemingly passive, she concealed a mind of extraordinary depth and cunning. Each day, each social engagement, each whispered insult or slight was woven into the fabric of a long-term plan, a plan that would turn societal norms, appearances, and expectations against those who had underestimated her. Florence, radiant yet fragile, provided both stage and backdrop for a drama of jealousy, vengeance, and meticulous orchestration. The city would come to witness, in ways both horrific and unforgettable, the terrifying capabilities of a mind that had long been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. Beneath the opulence of Florence's grand ballrooms, the widow's life was a tapestry woven with secrecy, cunning, and simmering resentment. Her days, spent amid polite society and whispered pleasantries, concealed a mind that calculated every interaction, measured every glance, and memorized every slight. In private, she reflected on the aristocrats who had wronged her, both openly and subtly. Their laughter, once the background to her life, now rang in her ears as a cruel reminder of their disregard. Each social slight, each casual insult, each whispered rumor had left a mark, and over the years, these marks had fused into something darker, a resolve that would soon erupt in ways that no one, not even the city's most learned chroniclers, could have anticipated. Her position as a widow gave her both visibility and invisibility. Among the nobles, she was expected to mourn, to display dignity and restraint, yet she had learned to use her status to her advantage. In her mourning attire, she could move unnoticed, speak without suspicion, and observe the behaviors of others without drawing attention. Her beauty, tempered now by a calculated maturity, became a weapon in subtle manipulations. She knew how to provoke jealousy, how to seduce trust, how to insinuate doubt without uttering a word. Every movement, every smile, every lowered eyelid was purposeful, a tool in the construction of a plan that had been years in the making. The aristocrats themselves, oblivious to the depth of her cunning, continued their games of social supremacy. Men vied for influence and women maneuvered for advantage, often underestimating her presence. She had long been the silent witness to whispered plots and concealed affairs, noting which alliances could crumble under pressure and which rivalries could be exploited. Some had underestimated her outright, dismissing her as a widow, a figure of society's past rather than its present. Others had tried to charm or manipulate her, unaware that they were feeding the fire that simmered in her mind. Each slight, intentional or accidental, became a thread in the web she would eventually weave, a lattice of vengeance built on precision, patience, and psychological insight. Her relationship with the aristocrats was complex, layered with historical grievances and personal resentment. She remembered the casual cruelty of certain men who had dismissed her opinions with condescending smiles, or the thinly veiled threats hidden behind polite gestures. She recalled the women who had mocked her attire, her manner, or her lineage, unaware that these small acts of disdain were fanning a quiet storm. Even those who professed friendship often betrayed her in subtle ways, sharing secrets with rivals, sowing doubt about her character, or merely failing to intervene when injustice struck. Over time, these betrayals accumulated, shaping her perception of the world and the people she inhabited it with. Florence, so beautiful from the outside, was for her a city of sharp edges, hidden malice, and fragile facades. Within this environment, the widow's mind became a battlefield of calculation and imagination. She studied human behavior with meticulous care, observing the small tells that indicated guilt, fear, or ambition. Every gesture, every tone of voice, every fleeting expression was cataloged and analyzed. She understood the fragility of pride, the volatility of jealousy, and the corrosive power of resentment. These insights allowed her to anticipate reactions, manipulate outcomes, and orchestrate scenarios in which others would unknowingly play into her plans. In the shadows of her drawing rooms, candlelight flickering against walls adorned with ancestral portraits, she rehearsed confrontations, visualized moments of decision, and imagined the precise movements of the night to come. The masquerade was not merely a social event. It was a stage on which her long-cultivated design would unfold. Even as she moved through Florence's streets, she carried the duality of appearance and intent. By day, she conversed with merchants, neighbors, and friends, projecting courtesy and propriety. By night, she became a silent observer, charting relationships and identifying weaknesses. The aristocrats believed her to be a figure constrained by decorum, yet she was a strategist, quietly mapping out every connection, every potential leverage point, and every opportunity for decisive action. She noted who trusted whom, who feared whom, and who was blind to the consequences of their own ambition. The web of human relationships, so intricate and delicate, was something she had mastered in its entirety, and she knew that a single, well-timed disruption could unravel lives as easily as a thread pulled from a tapestry. Her motives, though rooted in jealousy and resentment, were intertwined with a profound understanding of human psychology. She recognized that fear could be a more potent tool than force, that surprise and uncertainty could bend the will of even the most confident aristocrat. Her own grief, isolation, and experience of social marginalization had sharpened her perception, allowing her to predict responses to provocation with unsettling accuracy. She did not act out of blind rage. Rather, she acted with purpose, forethought, and a cold understanding of human nature. Every decision, every movement, every whispered word in preparation for the masquerade was a calculated step toward an outcome she had envisioned countless times. And yet, for all her meticulous planning, there was an element of unpredictability she could not fully control. The dynamics of the ball, the reactions of the guests, the subtle interference of fate, all remained variables she could only anticipate but never entirely command. This awareness of the unknown did not deter her. Instead, it heightened her focus, sharpening her senses, and intensifying her resolve. In the shadows behind her mask, a fire burned, a desire not merely for revenge, but for the assertion of control over a world that had long treated her with disregard. The city's beauty, the music, the laughter, all of it became a backdrop for the storm she had long envisioned, a stage upon which she would finally reveal the extent of her cunning, ambition, and unrelenting will. The night of the masquerade, therefore, was not simply an evening of festivity. It was the culmination of years of observation, calculation, and quiet fury. The widow had moved through Florence unnoticed, underestimated, and dismissed, but within her lay a force poised to shatter the fragile veneer of aristocratic civility. Behind every courteous gesture, every polite nod, every carefully chosen word, she had plotted with precision. The shadows behind her veil were alive with intention, a darkness that mirrored the city's hidden undercurrents. And as she prepared to step into the glittering hall, she did so with a mind as sharp as the blade she would metaphorically, and perhaps literally, wield. The masquerade was hers to command, and those who laughed and danced unaware that the night itself would soon be transformed into a tableau of fear, chaos, and unforgettable horror. The night had descended over Florence like a velvet shroud, cloaking the city in darkness while the lanterns flickered along narrow streets, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to twist and writhe with their own secrets. The grand hall of the widow's palace glowed with warm, golden light, spilling onto the cobblestones outside, a beacon of celebration and illusion. Guests arrived in elaborate costumes, masks hiding their faces but not the intentions behind their eyes. The music, soft and lilting at first, swelled into an orchestral tapestry of strings and harpsichords, commanding the attention of all who entered. The air was thick with perfumes and candle smoke, the mingling scents intoxicating, almost dizzying, heightening senses and sharpening anticipation. This night, like so many before it, was meant to be a display of power, beauty, and status, yet an undercurrent of tension coursed beneath the glittering surface, palpable to those with eyes keen enough to notice. The widow moved through the crowd with measured elegance, her mask concealing the quiet storm behind her gaze. She observed each guest carefully, noting gestures, alliances, and vulnerabilities. Her presence alone commanded attention, drawing curious eyes while concealing the precise calculations behind every step she took. Every smile she offered was measured, every nod, carefully timed. She was a shadow in plain sight, blending seamlessly into the pageantry while orchestrating a personal narrative that would soon collide violently with the unsuspecting participants. The masquerade, a spectacle of pleasure and indulgence, became a stage upon which she could manipulate, observe, and ultimately execute the plan she had nurtured for years. Her mind moved faster than her feet, mapping the room, anticipating movements, and mentally rehearsing the sequence of events that would soon unfold with horrifying precision. As the guests mingled, laughter filled the room, masking whispers of jealousy, rivalry, and secret longing. Couples danced in elegant patterns across the marble floor, their movements a choreography of grace and subtle competition. Yet amidst this beauty, the widow detected fissures in the carefully constructed social order. She saw the fleeting glances exchanged between old rivals, the hesitant hand gestures of those fearful of being observed, the barely perceptible signs of discomfort among those who suspected but could not yet name the lurking danger. Every interaction became a story, every gesture a clue, every word a potential tool. She cataloged them silently, weaving a mental map of intentions and weaknesses, understanding that even the most powerful masks could conceal fear, and that fear could be manipulated into action or inaction, precisely when she needed it most. The hall itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the walls themselves recognized the tension threading through the room. Tapestries depicting battles, ancient dynasties, and heroic triumphs loomed overhead, silent witnesses to centuries of human ambition and folly. Chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars, reflecting fragments of reality and illusion alike. Every candle flicker created shadows that danced across the faces of the guests, exaggerating expressions, hiding intentions, and adding an otherworldly dimension to the scene. The juxtaposition of splendor and darkness mirrored the duality of the widow herself, outwardly charming, elegant, and composed, yet inwardly calculating, cold, and relentless. In that moment, Florence was both beautiful and fragile, a city of brilliance masking the darkness that could erupt with devastating consequence. The music shifted into a waltz, and couples took to the floor, gliding with practiced precision, their masks obscuring true emotion. The widow, as if guided by instinct, positioned herself at the edge of the room, observing each movement, noting the subtle tensions, and identifying the perfect opportunities for her plan to unfold. She recognized that timing was crucial. The chaos of celebration could be transformed into terror with a single, well-placed disruption. Her mind traced every path, calculated every step, and anticipated every reaction. The air around her seemed charged with suspense, though none of the guests could sense the storm gathering just beyond the glittering facade. The night, so full of life and revelry, was about to be rewritten in ways that would shock Florence to its very core. Servants moved silently through the hall, their expressions careful and disciplined, unaware of the deeper plot shaping around them. Their duties, pouring wine, attending to needs, guiding lost guests, continued with mechanical precision, contrasting sharply with the widow's deliberate and conscious observation. She was both part of the scene and apart from it, a conductor in a symphony of deception. Small, seemingly insignificant interactions, an accidental brush of a hand, a whispered word, a fleeting glance, were logged in her mind, every detail meticulously noted, each a potential catalyst in the unfolding drama. Even the casual laughter of the aristocrats became part of her strategy, a rhythmic backdrop against which the crescendo of horror would soon rise. As the night deepened, the mask of civility began to slip ever so slightly for some. Whispers of past grievances surfaced in furtive glances and tightened jaws, while the widow's eyes caught every nuance. Her plan was subtle, requiring patience, observation, and precision, yet the tension was almost tangible, pressing against the ribs of the room like a living thing. She moved like a shadow between guests, observing the cracks in decorum, identifying the vulnerabilities she could exploit. Every element of the evening, the music, the flickering candlelight, the intricate dance of masks and costumes, was aligned with her vision, as if the entire city had conspired to stage the perfect tableau for the culmination of years of quiet resentment. By the time the first hour of the masquerade passed, the atmosphere had shifted imperceptibly, the undercurrent of unease threading through the laughter and music. Guests remained blissfully unaware of the precise danger that lurked among them. Yet the widow's presence radiated a subtle tension, a sense of quiet inevitability that something extraordinary and horrifying was about to occur. She had orchestrated every detail with care, allowing the night's beauty and elegance to mask the gathering storm. In the flickering candlelight, amid the swirling gowns and polished masks, Florence itself seemed to hold its breath, poised on the edge of a revelation that would forever alter its glittering image. And at the heart of it, the widow stood resolute, a figure of calm determination, ready to step beyond the veil of civility into the dark theater of vengeance she had so meticulously prepared. The revelry of the masquerade was shattered in the span of moments, as the glittering hall that had once echoed with music and laughter became a chamber of chaos and terror. The widow's plan, honed over months of meticulous observation and patient calculation, unfolded with ruthless precision. Candles flickered as panic rippled through the crowd, their light now illuminating faces twisted in shock and disbelief. The aristocrats, who had arrived under the comforting veil of elegance and civility, found themselves confronted with a reality they could neither predict nor escape. Each scream, each stumble across the polished marble floor, reverberated through the hall like a dark symphony, contrasting sharply with the music that had once dictated the rhythm of the evening. What had begun as a celebration now teetered on the edge of grotesque carnage, the gilded masquerade dissolving into a tableau of horror. The widow moved with calculated calm through the panic, her mask still perfectly in place, hiding both her identity and the cold satisfaction glinting in her eyes. She had studied each aristocrat in detail, understood their strengths, weaknesses, and fears, and exploited every opportunity to control the chaos she had unleashed. The first of her intended victims faltered, their elegant movements disrupted by a well-timed maneuver, and in that instant, the pattern of her orchestration became horrifyingly clear to anyone perceptive enough to observe. She was not a figure driven by blind rage. She was a strategist executing a plan that had been meticulously crafted to perfection. Each aristocrat fell into her carefully constructed web, the very environment of the masquerade amplifying their vulnerability. The masks they had worn for elegance and intrigue now obscured terror, creating a surreal and almost cinematic contrast between the beauty of the scene and the horror of the events transpiring within it. The first confrontation, sudden and shocking, set the tone for what was to follow. The aristocrats' initial disbelief quickly gave way to panic and confusion, their attempts to escape hampered by the intricacies of the grand hall. Chandeliers shimmered above like distant stars indifferent to human suffering, their light bouncing across walls adorned with ancestral portraits that seemed to watch silently as centuries of lineage were undone in a single night. Screams echoed against marble and tapestry, mingling with the once joyful music that had now descended into chaos. Servants scrambled, their faces pale and eyes wide, unsure whether to intervene or flee, their every instinct screaming danger. The widow, however, remained composed, a singular force moving through the turmoil, her intentions clear, her path unerringly precise. Each victim, carefully selected for reasons both personal and strategic, met their fate in ways that reflected not only the widow's meticulous planning, but also the psychological depth of her revenge. The nobles who had dismissed her, slighted her, or underestimated her now faced consequences they could neither anticipate nor counter. Their relationships with one another, once built on alliances, marriages, and fragile social pacts, now unraveled under the weight of sudden violence. The interplay of fear and betrayal became a living entity in the hall, one that the widow manipulated with expertise. Each step she took, each motion of her hand, directed the course of the chaos, ensuring that her carefully constructed narrative of vengeance unfolded with unrelenting efficiency. The aristocrats, once masters of their own social stage, now moved as pawns in her darkly conceived theater. The hall, previously a sanctuary of beauty and elegance, transformed into a scene of surreal horror. Masks, once symbols of intrigue and sophistication, now framed faces contorted with shock, fear, and disbelief. Jewelry glittered in the candlelight, mingling with spilled wine and the sheen of blood, creating a grotesque reflection of the opulence that had defined the night. Guests who had entered with a sense of superiority and security found themselves ensnared by the widow's strategic brilliance, each encounter carefully orchestrated to heighten both fear and confusion. The contrast between the lavish setting and the unfolding carnage heightened the emotional impact, transforming the masquerade into a nightmarish spectacle where beauty and terror were inseparably intertwined. Amid the chaos, whispers of betrayal and revenge traveled like sparks through dry kindling. The aristocrats, realizing that this was no random act of violence, tried to comprehend the motive, the strategy, and the mind behind such meticulously executed horror. Yet understanding came too late. The widow had anticipated every reaction, every attempt at resistance, and every potential obstacle. Her knowledge of the social hierarchy, the intricate rivalries, and the subtle power plays of the noble class gave her an almost supernatural advantage. She moved unseen and unchallenged, her calm demeanor in stark contrast to the disarray around her, ensuring that her personal vendetta would be executed flawlessly, while leaving witnesses to ponder the chilling depths of her intellect and resolve. The aftermath of each act compounded the tension in the hall. Survivors, those few who had avoided immediate confrontation, were paralyzed by fear, uncertainty, and disbelief. The elegant music, once the heartbeat of celebration, had transformed into a dissonant background, an ironic accompaniment to the human tragedy playing out below. The widow, now a central figure of both awe and terror, surveyed the scene with unflinching clarity, aware that the culmination of her meticulous planning was both shocking and inevitable. She was the eye of the storm, the orchestrator of a grim ballet that juxtaposed refinement with brutality. Every action reinforced her control over the night. Every scream, every retreat, every faltering gesture of the nobles affirming the precision of her design. By the time the last moments of chaos settled into a tense, horrific stillness, Florence itself seemed to exhale in muted horror. The masquerade, intended as a celebration of wealth, elegance, and social order, had been transformed into a night of blood, terror, and psychological devastation. The widow had not only executed her vengeance, but had revealed the fragility of aristocratic power, the vulnerability hidden beneath layers of decorum, and the terrifying potential of a mind both brilliant and unyielding. As silence descended over the hall, broken only by gasps of disbelief and the quiet sobs of the traumatized, the contrast between the night's opulent beginnings and its gruesome climax was undeniable. Florence would never forget the masquerade, nor the calculated darkness that had descended upon it, a chilling reminder that beneath elegance and sophistication often lurked a shadow capable of consuming everything in its path. In the immediate aftermath of the massacre, Florence was a city gripped by fear, disbelief, and the relentless hum of rumor. The palaces that had once echoed with music now whispered secrets of horror. News traveled fast, carried by trembling servants, fearful neighbors, and curious townsfolk who had gathered at the edges of the aristocratic sphere. Each retelling of the night's events added layers of exaggeration, distortion, and shock, as is often the case when the human mind struggles to comprehend acts of calculated cruelty. The widow's identity, once a symbol of grace and refinement, became a subject of suspicion and whispered speculation. Even the most skeptical citizens could sense the cold precision behind the horror, a crime that was not spontaneous, not the product of unbridled passion, but of deliberate, meticulous orchestration. Authorities arrived quickly, summoned from various corners of the city, their robes and insignias a stark contrast to the carnage and disarray they were called to confront. They were met with the grotesque aftermath, the shattered remnants of a grand masquerade, furniture overturned in frantic attempts to escape, spilled wine mingling with blood, and masks that had once concealed identity now frozen in expressions of terror. Witnesses were numerous but unreliable, their memories skewed by panic, by fear, and by the surreal horror of the night. The investigators had to parse through layers of social etiquette, deception, and aristocratic privilege to reach a coherent account of events. In Florence, law and justice were intertwined with status, and even in the face of such a shocking act, the authorities tread carefully, wary of offending powerful families or creating further scandal. The widow's role in the massacre was immediately suspected by some, yet proving her involvement required patience and ingenuity. Her reputation as a calm, composed, and socially adept widow had long shielded her from scrutiny, and her social connections provided layers of protection. Still, subtle clues began to emerge: servants' testimonies, inconsistencies in the accounts of guests, and the careful observation of behaviors that revealed more than words ever could. She had left traces, though minimal, and the perceptive investigators soon noted patterns pointing toward her. The aristocrats who survived whispered of her unnerving composure during the chaos, the precise manner in which she seemed to maneuver through danger unscathed, and the unsettling sense that the entire night had unfolded according to a plan that only she could have conceived. As the investigation unfolded, Florence itself became a stage for scandal. Newspapers and pamphlets, though less pervasive than they would be in later centuries, carried sensationalized accounts of the massacre to neighboring cities. Gossip spread through salons and tea rooms, where women speculated on motives and men debated the implications for inheritance and political alliances. The widow's name was uttered with a mixture of fear, fascination, and admiration, as if acknowledging the terrifying brilliance of her mind, even while condemning the horror of her actions. Each retelling of the story contributed to the growing mythology of the event, elevating it beyond a simple crime into an enduring tale of human obsession, cunning, and malice. Witnesses were questioned repeatedly, their accounts conflicting and often contradictory. Some described the widow moving with unnatural composure. Others claimed to see her near the scenes of the crimes, while a few insisted she appeared absent, as though orchestrating from afar. Her social position, previously an advantage, now complicated the investigation. Families sought to protect her, while others maneuvered to exploit the situation for political or social gain. The city's courts were flooded with petitions, accusations, and counterclaims, creating a complex web of intrigue that mirrored the very plots and rivalries the widow had observed and exploited for years. Investigators had to navigate not only the facts of the case, but also the treacherous waters of aristocratic privilege and societal expectation, where reputation often mattered more than truth. The psychological dimension of the widow's actions fascinated the authorities, chroniclers, and ordinary citizens alike. They speculated on her motives: jealousy, revenge, ambition, or perhaps a desire to assert control over a world that had dismissed her. Her calm and deliberate demeanor during and after the massacre suggested a mind both methodical and extraordinarily disciplined, capable of long-term planning and extreme precision. This fascination only amplified the scandal, as people attempted to reconcile the image of a refined widow with the capacity for such violent, ruthless acts. Scholars and philosophers of the time debated the moral and social implications, while ordinary citizens whispered about the dangers that might lurk behind the faces of those they trusted. The investigation also revealed systemic weaknesses in the enforcement of justice in Florence. The authorities struggled to balance the need for thorough inquiry with the demands of social hierarchy, and many were hesitant to confront a figure so embedded within elite circles. Corruption, fear, and influence slowed proceedings, allowing the widow to maintain a careful distance and, in some cases, manipulate perceptions in her favor. The contrast between her private cunning and the public limitations of law enforcement highlighted the vulnerability of even the most structured societies to extraordinary acts of deliberate violence. Every day that passed without resolution intensified both fear and fascination, and the city itself seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for justice, or vengeance, to be exacted. By the end of the first week, the widow's reputation had shifted from one of quiet elegance to legendary infamy. She was both reviled and admired, a figure whose intelligence and cold precision could not be denied. The investigation had illuminated not only her capabilities, but also the fragility of social order in a world governed by privilege, appearances, and hidden resentments. Florence, once proud of its sophistication and grandeur, now faced a reckoning with the darkness that had always lurked just beneath its gilded surface. The masquerade had ended in blood, but the ripple effects of that night, the scandal, the public fascination, and the careful unraveling of truth and deception, would linger for decades, ensuring that the widow's name would endure in both fear and legend. The city of Florence, still trembling from the massacre, now turned its attention to justice. The trial of the widow became the focal point of every conversation in salons, taverns, and marketplaces. Courtiers whispered behind fans, merchants speculated in hushed tones, and the clergy debated morality and divine punishment. The courthouse, a solemn building adorned with classical stone columns and austere frescoes, became the stage upon which history would witness both human cunning and the limitations of law. The widow arrived, poised, her mask now replaced by an expression of calm neutrality, though her eyes burned with an intensity that belied her composed exterior. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, as if she were still conducting the events of that fateful night from the courtroom itself. The prosecution laid out the sequence of events with meticulous detail, recounting the horrors of the masquerade and the deliberate precision with which the aristocrats had been struck down. Witnesses recounted their observations, their voices trembling as they described screams, the chaos of overturned furniture, and the almost supernatural composure of the widow amid blood and panic. The authorities highlighted the premeditated nature of her actions, emphasizing that this was not a crime of passion, but a carefully executed plan of vengeance. Each testimony painted her as a figure both brilliant and terrifying, someone whose intellect had been harnessed for destruction. The courtroom listened with a mixture of horror and fascination, the tension thick enough to choke, every detail intensifying the weight of her perceived guilt. The widow's defense, however, was as calculated as the crime itself. She maintained her composure, speaking with eloquence and a deliberate calm that unnerved both jurors and spectators alike. Her arguments intertwined appeals to social norms, legal technicalities, and subtle manipulations of human empathy. She framed herself as a woman wronged by society, a widow navigating a treacherous world where trust was fragile and betrayal ever present. Each word was chosen to cast doubt upon the motives of witnesses, to challenge assumptions, and to paint the masquerade's chaos as something beyond her control. In her poised rhetoric, she revealed not remorse, but an acute awareness of perception, understanding that in the theater of justice, narrative could be as powerful as evidence. Observers noted the psychological dimension of the trial with fascination. Here was a woman whose intellect and composure had allowed her to orchestrate one of Florence's most shocking nights, and now she employed the same mental precision to manipulate perception in the courtroom. Scholars, scribes, and moral philosophers debated the implications. Could brilliance itself, when divorced from morality, be a weapon more potent than physical force? Could a mind capable of such meticulous planning evade the bounds of justice? Each day of proceedings added layers to the public's perception of the widow, transforming her from a social figure into a legend, a living embodiment of both fear and admiration. The courtroom drama became a mirror reflecting societal anxieties, the fragility of civility, and the terrifying potential of intellect untempered by conscience. The jury faced a daunting task. They had to weigh not only the material evidence, but also the intricate web of motives, premeditation, and manipulation. Letters, financial records, and testimonies were scrutinized with painstaking detail, each piece of evidence dissected and interpreted. The widow's reputation and social standing added another layer of complexity. The aristocracy's reluctance to condemn one of their own conflicted with the undeniable brutality of the crime. Debate raged over subtle inconsistencies in witness accounts, the credibility of servants, and the psychological profile of the accused. The tension was almost unbearable, the courtroom itself a crucible in which Florence's moral, social, and legal principles were tested against the stark reality of calculated violence. Public reaction to the trial was electric. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, eager for news, reacting to every detail that slipped from the lips of those inside. Pamphlets and letters circulated accounts of the widow's behavior, her speeches, and her strategic calm. The city's elite whispered anxiously about the implications for social order, inheritance, and familial honor. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens debated the spectacle with fascination and horror, marveling at the audacity of the crime and the intellect behind it. Newspapers, although rudimentary by modern standards, carried sensationalized accounts that amplified the drama, ensuring that the widow's story would endure beyond the confines of Florence, seeping into the folklore of Tuscany and beyond. As the trial drew to its conclusion, the widow's demeanor never wavered. She sat with quiet dignity, observing reactions, noting the subtle shifts in posture and expression among jurors and spectators alike. Her calmness, which had once been a tool of private manipulation, now functioned as a shield against condemnation, a demonstration of control over both circumstance and perception. The contrast between her composed figure and the emotional turbulence surrounding her heightened the dramatic tension, emphasizing the terrifying mastery she exerted over both her environment and the people within it. The courtroom, a site of justice, became instead a stage for psychological intrigue, moral reflection, and societal examination. Finally, the verdict was delivered. The words resonated through the chamber, carrying with them the weight of both law and public fascination. The widow, standing as the embodiment of both intellect and menace, received her judgment with unflinching poise, her expression a mask that mirrored the composure she had maintained throughout the trial. The consequences, though severe, did little to diminish the aura of awe and dread that now surrounded her name. Florence, while attempting to restore order and reconcile with the horror of the masquerade, could not erase the image of the widow who had defied convention, manipulated perception, and executed a crime of chilling precision. Her trial and judgment solidified her place in history, not merely as a criminal, but as a figure of psychological brilliance and terrifying resolve, a reminder of how beauty, intellect, and darkness could intertwine in ways that haunted generations. The echoes of that fateful night lingered in Florence long after the last candle flickered and the courtroom emptied. The massacre at the masquerade had etched itself into the city's collective memory, transforming a single night of revelry into a chilling legend. Stories spread through piazzas, palaces, and narrow alleyways, each retelling imbued with a mix of horror and awe. The widow's name became synonymous with cunning, ruthlessness, and the terrifying potential of intellect combined with vengeance. Even decades later, Florence would whisper her story as both cautionary tale and macabre fascination, a reminder that beneath the gilded veneer of society, darkness could take root and flourish. The immediate aftermath had seen Florence grappling with the fragility of its aristocratic order. Families who had survived the night of blood were left to reconcile the terror they had witnessed with the delicate social structures they sought to maintain. Trust, once assumed in the corridors of wealth and power, became a fragile commodity, easily fractured by fear and suspicion. The elite learned that appearances, no matter how meticulously curated, could mask lethal intent. Aristocrats began to question the loyalty of even their closest allies, and the city itself developed a heightened awareness of the hidden dangers within its opulent walls. The widow's actions had not only exacted personal revenge, but had fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of Florence's nobility. Artists, chroniclers, and poets took up the tale, capturing it in paintings, illuminated manuscripts, and ballads. The masquerade, once celebrated for elegance and spectacle, became a symbol of vulnerability and moral reflection. Portraits depicted masked figures frozen in terror, chandeliers casting fractured light upon marble floors stained with blood. Writers explored the complexity of the widow's motives, examining her jealousy, her grievances, and the meticulous precision of her actions. In every medium, the narrative was transformed from mere crime into a study of human ambition, resentment, and the capacity for calculated destruction. The city's cultural memory enshrined the event as both historical record and moral allegory, ensuring that future generations would remember not only the horror, but the intellect behind it. The widow herself, though removed from public life by imprisonment or exile, became a figure of enduring fascination. Scholars debated her psychology, analyzing how grief, isolation, and perceived slights could coalesce into acts of extreme cunning and violence. They speculated on the meticulous planning, the understanding of human behavior, and the strategic manipulation that had enabled her to orchestrate the massacre. Her story was dissected as both cautionary tale and testament to the power of intellect divorced from morality. Philosophers pondered whether genius and cruelty were inherently linked, and whether society's failure to recognize her potential in life had indirectly facilitated the horrors of that night. In this sense, the widow transcended her role as criminal. She became an archetype of human complexity, a shadow that haunted Florence's collective consciousness. For ordinary citizens, the masquerade and its bloody consequences were stories whispered with equal parts fear and fascination. Children grew up hearing hushed accounts, learning that beneath wealth, beauty, and civility, danger could lurk unseen. The widow's tale became a form of folklore, a story passed down not only for its shock value, but for its moral lessons. The consequences of envy, the potency of cunning, and the terrifying precision of calculated revenge. Markets buzzed with speculation, tavern storytellers animated their audiences with every twist and detail, and even merchants far from the aristocratic centers found themselves captivated by the narrative. In this way, the widow's legacy extended beyond the walls of her palace, touching every stratum of Florentine society. Politically, the massacre prompted introspection and subtle reforms. Authorities, shaken by the precision and audacity of the crime, reevaluated the effectiveness of their security measures, the vulnerabilities inherent in social events, and the limitations of influence and oversight within elite circles. Noble families, traumatized by the disruption of social hierarchies, reconsidered alliances and protocols for gatherings. The psychological shock of realizing that a single individual could dismantle centuries of social order instilled both fear and respect, altering patterns of trust and control for decades. The widow, through her actions, had inadvertently reshaped Florence's aristocratic landscape, ensuring that her night of vengeance would continue to influence power dynamics long after the immediate consequences had passed. Even historians centuries later have grappled with the duality of the widow's legacy. She is at once villain and mastermind, a figure who embodies both human vulnerability and extraordinary calculation. Analyses focus not only on her actions, but on the societal structures that enabled her to operate with such devastating effectiveness. Her story is taught as a cautionary study in power, influence, and the lethal combination of intellect and resentment. Florence itself, through its architecture, its chroniclers, and its folklore, preserves her memory as an enduring symbol of the tension between civility and chaos, of the thin line that separates decorum from devastation. Ultimately, the night of blood at the masquerade remains an indelible mark on history. It is remembered not only for the shock and horror, but for the profound insight it offers into human psychology, societal vulnerability, and the enduring consequences of unchecked envy and ambition. The widow's legacy, terrifying yet fascinating, continues to captivate the imagination, a dark reminder that beneath the most glittering of masks can lie a mind capable of unimaginable precision, calculation, and ruthlessness. Florence, ever radiant yet forever haunted, holds the memory of that night as a testament to both human ingenuity and human darkness. A night when elegance gave way to terror, and a single individual's resolve reshaped a city's history.